Oi. Bom dia. Bom dia a todos. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here in our second day of the conference, Climate and Labor, a joint initiative of Pulitzer Center and Universidade de Coimbra. And thank you very much for your presence in person and online at our conference today. And for those who are joining the conference just today, my name is Mariana Rigo. I am program manager of the Amazon Basin and Pulitzer Center, and I will be hosting you today during the conference. I have some messages for our audiences, the same as yesterday. So please join us on the social media with the hashtag climate and labor 2023. And please, for those who are listening us attending from online, you can choose your preferred language: Portuguese, French, Bahasa, and English in the Zoom option. For the online audience, please submit your question on the Q&A bar option, especially during the panels. And for those who are online as well, don't forget to complete our survey to claim your certificate of participation. The survey is on the chat. For those who are here, please use the QR code. And well, thank you very much. So I would like to start our keynote session now, and we will discuss climate and coloniality. I would like to call Mariana Riquito. Mariana is a PhD candidate at the Institute for Social Science Research of the University of Amsterdam, the Netherlands, and she's a junior researcher at the Center of Social Studies of Universidade de Coimbra. Thank you very much, Mariana, for joining us. And I would also like to call Professor Antonio Carvalho. Antonio Carvalho works as an assistant professor at the Faculty of Economics of the Universidade de Coimbra, and his current research interests includes biopolitics, the Anthropocene, mindfulness, and post-humanist theory and effect. Currently, she's the vice coordinator of Risk Observatory. Thank you very much. The floor is with you. Thank you.
Okay. Check my PowerPoint if it's working. Good morning, everyone. First of all, sorry. Okay, it seems to be working. So let me check. So I have quite a bit of an issue here because I had my PowerPoint in Portuguese, so I'll have to translate everything as I speak. So sorry if my English sounds a bit off, but I'll do my best. And it's quite early as well, so I'm quite tired. So let's see how this works. Anyway, so I also like to mention that my presentation, and also believe Mariana's presentation, will not be focused on the issue of climate coloniality. I think Gustavo yesterday gave us an excellent presentation, a brilliant presentation about this topic. Today, I'll basically provide you with some critical remarks about some of the articulations between the discourses of climate crisis and climate action, and what I'll be coining as techno-scientific dogmatism. So I'll basically try to articulate and unpack some of the critical issues of the mainstream and hegemonic climate discourse. And this will stem from a research project where Mariana also worked on the ontologies of the Anthropocene in Portugal. So this research project funded by the Portuguese Foundation of Science and for Science and Technology was basically focused on the dominant mechanisms of how the climate crisis and climate action are articulated and addressed in the Portuguese context. So this presentation will basically an attempt to, to reflect on how the climate crisis has sort of become an hegemonic device of domination at various levels. And this will be focusing on issues such as governance devices, top-down governance devices, what we could also describe as subjectification devices, also the emergence of problematic and questionable technologies from the ethical and political standpoints. And also, this will also address issues of extractivism, such as green extractivism, which have to do with some current socio-technical and also environmental controversies in the Portuguese case. I'll also look at some similarities between the activist and official discourses on climate action and the climate crisis, and eventually impacts on national, local, and individual sovereignty. So basically, the presentation will focus on some of these issues. Okay, let me see if I can work with this. Okay. So the first aspect that I'd like to bring today, and which was also addressed while conducting this research project called TROPO, Ontologies of the Anthropocene in Portugal. It has to do with the ways in which certain governance mechanisms are deployed and are implemented at European and national level to basically curtail, but it also in a certain way to adapt governance mechanisms to the challenges of the climate crisis. And we basically looked in the Portuguese case to the ways in which the European Green Deal has been appropriated and has been translated to the Portuguese context. So this, for instance, included the ways in which in the Portuguese context, we have witnessed the emergence of, for instance, the Portuguese carbon neutrality roadmap that basically puts forward and provides us with ways, mechanisms, and also scenarios where Portugal will be able to achieve net zero of carbon emissions until 2050. And basically, while conducting this research, what we found quite striking was related to the ways in which this document and these policy proposals entail a wide range of imaginaries, and it can be also quite controversial in the ways in which certain issues, such as issues dealing with jobs and fossil fuel jobs, will basically create some social issues. So while on the one hand, there seems to be a consensus regarding the need for national states, for Europe, but also Portugal, to address the issue of the climate crisis and also the energy transition, in a sense, this can be quite controversial, and also allows us to analyze what happens exactly with these documents and practice, and what are the impacts of these documents. So what do these documents do, and what do these policy proposals do in practice? So they basically try to define certain goals, certain temporalities to achieve carbon neutrality. They also sort of reify carbon, but also fossil fuels as the main focus for transition processes and transition issues. So in the literature, we usually coin this process as carbon reductionism. There's also sort of a techno-scientific, a bureaucratic vision of governance, mostly focused on science and technology and mainstream ways of dealing with science and technology. There's also the reinforcement of public policy standardization, and also the European convergence between Portugal and the EU. And in a sense, the climate crisis can be understood while looking at these mechanisms as sort of a narrative or a meta-narrative for governance devices and processes, but also for legislation and for the reconfiguration of socio-economical systems. And one issue that is also quite striking and quite interesting, and in a sense also quite controversial, is the ways in which social issues are integrated into the EU strategy for carbon neutrality, namely regarding the issue of just transition. And this was also a topic that was mentioned yesterday and that has also a strong connection with the issue of labor and the issue of jobs and so on. And regarding this mechanism of just transition, what we find quite striking, sorry, yeah, oh, okay, yeah, so it's this one. Sorry. What I find quite striking is the ways in which there's sort of a depoliticized lexicon and discourse that de-emphasize the social, but also the ethical and the benign and sustainable dimension of transition and governance processes. So in a sense, this can be read and can be interpreted as a way of marginalizing the negative externalities of energy transition, but also climate action at European level. And regarding specifically the incorporation of this notion, this concept of just transition within the mechanism of transition and European Green New Deal, this can be understood as sort of alluding to the ways in which the social impacts can become a key dimension to the governance devices that are managed by the same agents, by the same entities that are responsible for, the mainstream energy transition, but also ultimately for the climate crisis. So this can be quite controversial. And in that sense, also through the lenses of, critical theory, but also Foucauldian theory, we can look at the social dimension of transition as prone to a process of governmentalization, which also quite controversial. So this means that there's sort of a similarity, and there's some bridges between two discourses and two sides to this controversy and to this process, which sort of is sustained by the ways in which the climate crisis, but also a certain techno-scientific dogmatism becomes the epistemological foundation and also the ontological foundation for the official, but also for the activist responses to the climate crisis. And the commonalities between these two branches of the climate controversy and the climate action device and assemblage is also quite striking. For instance, if we look at some of the ways in which the climate crisis and this issue is portrayed and also is mobilized by official actors such as the UN General Secretary, Antonio Guterres. But also if you look, for instance, at the discourses of, Extinction Rebellion, for instance, or even Youth Climate Strike, Fridays for Future, we find sort of a same sense of apocalypse, 5 minutes, sorry. So I don't have much time, so I'll try to speed it up. So we find commonalities between discourses that sound quite striking, and it's in a sense this sort of indicates that there's a commonality between the epistemological and the ontological basis for climate action and for climate crisis, in a sense that there's some information from techno-scientific backgrounds that seems to be informing and influencing the way in which collectively we imagine this problem, and the ways also in which we sort of frame the ways in which we should address and respond to this issue. But there's also another aspect that I'd like to emphasize, and this aspect has to do with the ways in which we conceive ourselves regarding the climate crisis, and the way in which the climate crisis becomes sort of a mediator and a strong device of mediation in which we make sense of ourselves and make sense of our subjectivities, and also we rebuild our psychologies. So this has to do with certain phenomena that is arising recently. We hear a lot about climate anxiety, eco-anxiety. So this seems to have an impact on the ways in which we start to conceive ourselves as agents, but also as being traumatized by what is going on with the climate crisis. And this also connects quite well to another aspect, which has to do with the neoliberal environmentalism, which has to do with the ways in which national states and corporations delegate the climate and ecological responsibility to individuals that in turn sort of become interpolated, are interpolated, and need to address the climate crisis if it becomes personal. So there's a blurring and there's a suspension between the effective, the ethical, the planetary. And this also has impacts on consumption patterns. For instance, Slavoj Žižek talks a lot about cultural capitalism. In terms of consumption patterns, we could argue that certain ecological consumption patterns are being affected by the ethical and political characteristics of certain objects and certain products that we now acquire. Basically, this is a call to actually look at the ways in which contemporary biopolitics is being affected by concerns with the environment and concerns with the climate crisis. Okay. And this is something that Mariana, okay, not this one. And another aspect that that we find quite striking has to do with the ways in which certain technologies are being imagined and put forward to deal with the climate crisis. And something we did in this project called Tropo was to look at the ethical and social impacts of a set of technologies called geoengineering that sometimes you find is in the mainstream literature that has to do with Anthropocene. If adaptation and mitigation measures do not work, maybe we should look at certain technologies to manipulate the climate, and this will actually avoid climate catastrophe and the climate emergency. And actually, there are two sets of technologies that are being imagined. One regarding geoengineering, one has to do with solar radiation management, and another one with carbon dioxide removal. So, okay. So these two technologies create a lot of concerns in the literature and also in the public engagement exercises that we conducted in this project. Because it's basically a technofix for the climate crisis. And once again, science and technology is enrolled to deal with problems generated by modernity, capitalism. So we sort of find an expansion of commodification mechanisms and also control mechanisms towards new frontiers such as space, the stratosphere, and so on. And in a sense, the climate crisis becomes, it sort of justifies the deliberate manipulation of Earth systems. So, and also this is quite problematic because it can, for instance, increase north-south imbalances and also the strengthening and power of corporate, political, and scientific elites. So this is quite striking and problematic. Yeah, so these two examples, one of them has to do with lithium mining that Mariana will address in her presentation. And usually if you look at the ways in which lithium mining is being, put forward and proposed and in Portugal by political actors, it is usually framed according to the climate emergency. In climate action, we need lithium, to build batteries for electric cars. So lithium is justified in a sense. And once again, this generates a lot of contradictions that also apply and that are also present regarding current debates and current environmental movements that have to do with the construction of power stations, namely in Alentejo. So these debates that we're witnessing in Portugal at the moment regarding some environmental movements, environmental controversies arise and usually are justified by political and corporate actors in relation to the climate crisis itself. We need solar power, we need lithium for batteries, for electric cars. And in that sense, the climate crisis sort of becomes the underlying discursive, but also material mechanism for these projects. And, mining companies and international mining companies usually rely on the climate crisis to justify their exploits and their actions and their mining processes and so on. So we could argue that in practice, the energy transition also leads to green sacrifice zones, and extractivism sort of is mobilized as a response to address the climate crisis, And yeah, okay. So we witnessed a lot of environmental movements against these projects. And once again, this kind of, it's the bottleneck of the climate crisis because it's turned basically into a way to increase these processes of extractivism. And this leads to, climate colonialism, to energy colonialism, to infrastructural colonialism, where we witness corporations from the global north implementing certain projects in Southern Europe, namely in Portugal, and this is quite controversial. I was going to say something else about climate lockdowns and so on. I don't have much time, so I'll just go to the final slides with some conclusions and provocations. So it could be argued that certain corporations, national governments, and transnational institutions resort to the climate crisis to promote new top-down government devices, the enactment of green sacrifice zones, the imposition of new mechanisms of consumption and sustainable behavior, to, in a sense, curtail national, local, and individual sovereignty, to create new mechanisms of extractivism and instrumentalization of the planet in face of carbon neutrality, in order to enforce carbon neutrality. So in a sense, the biodiversity and the complexity of human and non-human systems is reduced, is sacrificed in order to attend to this obsession with carbon emissions. And there's definitely a role of technoscientific dogmatism to justify the necropolitics, which some authors coin as the necropolitics of the climate crisis and inevitability of energy transition. So in a sense, the climate crisis is institutionalized, is represented in discourse of global actors, corporations, governments, to reproduce, to reconfigure the dominant system. So the same actors that are supposedly responsible for the climate crisis now show up as leading the energy transition, climate action. So this leads to the question, are the capitalist and modern institutions able to fix the climate crisis created by themselves? And technology, namely after the Industrial Revolution, is at the basis of the environmental and climate crisis. Can the solution be technological? Are we facing a climate crisis or a metabolic crisis of the capitalist system and of modernization itself? And are there limits to what can be colonialized and sacrificed in the name of the climate and decarbonization? And who can speak for the climate and the planet? And I'll just conclude my presentation with a meme about carbon taxes. Okay, thank you for your time and sorry about this weird presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Antonio. Hello, everyone. Good morning to everyone here and to everyone online. My name is Mariana, and today, as Antonio has already mentioned a little bit, I will be presenting you a particular case study regarding lithium extraction that is going on in Portugal, more precisely in the northern part of our country, in the Barroso region. So I brought a lot of beautiful pictures of this beautiful region, which is, as Antonio hinted at, being sacrificed in the name of tackling the climate crisis and achieving carbon neutrality goals. I have a brief context that Antonio has already partially hinted at, which is the context of the energy transition, which is being portrayed with a set of very urgent temporalities. As you know, the European Green Deal was announced in December 2019 with the goals of making every EU policy fit to reach carbon neutrality by 2050. This means a process of decarbonization by which all productive sectors should not emit new CO2 emissions by 2050. And furthermore, there's a new climate plan which ensures that by 2030, so in just 7 years, we should cut down on 55% of all carbon emissions. One of the sectors that's being mainly targeted by this energy transition is the transportation sector, because it is on average responsible for 29% of the total greenhouse gas emissions across the EU member states. And so one of the big EU policies is to ensure that by 2050, all cars or nearly all cars on the roads will be zero emission. This means that this will be electric vehicles. And this has given rise to the ascension of one crucial element, which is lithium. You've probably all heard about it recently because it is really skyrocketing. Lithium is used to store not only the energy produced by renewable energies, such as solar power or wind turbines, but it is also the key component in the lightweight rechargeable batteries of electric vehicles. And so the EU estimates the need for 18 times more lithium by 2030 and 60 times more by 2050 when compared to 2020 supply levels. This is a big growth in demand for this metal, which is mostly found on what we call the lithium triangle in Latin America, in Chile, Bolivia, and Argentina. Specifically, the batteries for electric vehicles and renewable energies are expected to drive up the demand for lithium by almost 60,000% by 2050. So really, we see that lithium is a critical element, is perceived as a strategic element for the EU, but most importantly for the automobile industry, for the car industry, because lithium is going to truly be used for the batteries of electric vehicles. And even though the EU now currently maintains basically 100% of import reliance on lithium from other foreign countries, specifically, as I said, especially from the lithium triangle and especially from Chile, the EU now aims to produce 89% of the batteries for electric vehicles domestically in Europe by 2030. And for that, a set of legislative, administrative policy mechanisms have been implemented in the past recent years to ensure that lithium, a domestic supply chain of lithium is possible in the European continent. So for example, in 2017, the European Battery Alliance was established. In September 2020, the European Raw Materials Alliance was implemented, and lithium was added to the list of critical raw materials. And just now, very recently, in March 2023, the European Critical Raw Materials Act was implemented. This is an especially important document to be aware of because it speeds up the process and simplifies the process of all environmental licensing and projects which are deemed to be strategic for the European continent. And so lithium is truly skyrocketing, is a new green hero. Some are calling it the new white gold. And as lithium becomes so important to tackle the climate goals, or more especially the carbon goals, Portugal is also in the spotlight. Portugal is known for having Europe's largest known lithium reserves, even though this number is highly contested because a lot of it also relies on speculation. Since to this day, Portugal does not have any lithium mine. Portugal was responsible for 1.6% of share of the production of lithium in Europe, but that actually comes from other mines that extract, for example, wolfram or other elements. But in any case, the Portuguese government is truly seeing lithium as a way to place Portugal in a position of leadership within the EU. As Antonio said, the official discourses really want to see lithium extraction as a way of shifting the traditionally peripheral position of the country within the EU and shifting the north-south imbalances that we see within the EU. So our government is saying, okay, now we can become a net exporter of energy. Now we can make a lot of money and really invest on lithium in order to be a strategic player in the European energy transition. And the epicenter of this lithium rush is in the Barroso region. Barroso is located in the district of Vila Real, and it is a very important region because it was in 2018 was the first Portuguese region, and actually one of the only 7 European, to be classified as World Agricultural Heritage, and was designated globally important agricultural system by the UN agency, the Food and Agricultural Organization of the UN, the United Nations. Barroso is the towns of Barroso preserve virtually to this day ancestral methods of treating the land and of treating livestock. Most of the land in Barroso is called baldios, common lands, which means these are neither private nor public property. They are common property. These are common assets that are managed and administrated communally by everyone who lives on these lands. And so Barroso truly was recognized by the FAO for its importance in preserving biodiversity, in preserving agricultural methods of sustainable land use, but also of having communitarian values and a system of communitarian values which subsist until today. However, this region is threatened. As you see there, there's 8 signed concession contracts for mining exploitation in this region. There's 7 other contracts which are being currently analyzed by the Directorate General for Energy and Geology. And the most important project, or the one that is at the latest stage of development, is called the Mina do Barroso project. This is a project owned by a British multinational, Savannah Resources. Savannah Resources is not a mining company, is what we would call a junior company, but it's actually a stock exchange company. So the business of Savannah Resources is really to make this project as profitable as possible. And so here we see the financial aspect of lithium extraction and how much speculation is also present in this case. So then this project has the potential to become Western Europe's largest open pit lithium mine. As you can see on the image, the visual impacts of what this mine could potentially be are great. It consists of 4 open pit mines, and on top of that, all the other technological infrastructure needed to extract lithium. This would work 24/7 in a period of approximately 12 to 16 years. Savannah is coining this project as green and smart mining. And for the past 6 years, and even more, local populations have been resisting, and this project has been delayed further and further. Just yesterday, the public consultation to the amendments of the environmental impact assessment, the public consultation phase closed. But what is important to notice is that this environmental impact assessment was in 2020 declared non-compliant to environmental standards twice. Then later on, the evaluation committee of the Portuguese environmental body gave a very unfavorable opinion to this environmental impact assessment. However, there are 2 entities which are also part of this commission. These are the Director General of Energy and Geology and the National Laboratory of Energy and Geology. And these are the 2 who are really pushing forward for lithium extraction, and because they also have a lot of economic and financial interests in making lithium extraction a reality in the country. And this is why the EIA was further again amended and subject to public consultation until yesterday, and now we are awaiting the Portuguese Environmental Agency final opinion by May 31st. So this is really a hot topic, as we would say. Here, there's just some, as Antonio was saying, the climate crisis is being used to justify a lot of things. One of these could be considered, a type of climate colonialism, as Gustavo mentioned, a type of green sacrifice zones. These zones are really being colonized and sacrificed in the name of tackling climate change, in the name of meeting the carbon neutrality goals. And this is why the logo of the company is enabling Europe's energy transition. But what the local populations are contesting to that is that mining is not green. Green is Barroso, Verde é o Barroso. And precisely Barroso is a very important environmental biodiversity hotspot and units. And at stake are severe ecological impacts. People are worried about the destruction of natural goods, namely water. This is a region with one of the best water resources in Portugal. And as we know, Portugal has been going through severe droughts, which have also impacted this region last year and this year. So water is really one of the goods that is severely at stake and severely impacted by this mining project, which would potentially also use the water from the rivers, would pollute the waters from the rivers. And so truly water is one of the main ecological impacts. There's also concerns over air contamination, noise and sound pollution, soil drainage, mining waste, and really concerns that the mine will destroy, ruin, or bury this village are commonly employed by the majority of the population. There's also a lot of social impacts. We're here in a conference talking about climate and labor, and often we hear that these mines will bring jobs to the region, will really foster the socioeconomic development of this region. But actually the socioeconomic impacts of such a mine would be extensive. The Barroso region is an agricultural region where people are employed in agriculture or other activities. It's also a region where a lot of tourism happens. And so concerns over the destruction or the loss of jobs are also at stake. But importantly, the loss of agrarian traditions, identities, practices, concerns over social fragmentation, rural depopulation, and agrarian land grabbing are really at stake. And these are some things that are already being felt by the local population. This psychological drain, this exhaustion, etc. Oh, no. Sorry. And just to conclude, because I don't have much time and this was intended to be a short presentation, what is important to notice, and I think here we are in an audience with full of journalists and people somehow linked to social communication, and what we have been witnessing are big resistances, and locally, nationally, and even internationally. A lot of people have been mobilizing, organizing protests, actions, campings, forming international alliances and networks to really contest the prospective lithium mine, not just this mine of Barroso, but many others which are threatening the whole of Portugal, but also these international alliances are formed as a way to say no to mining, yes to life, which means no to the type of energy transition and to the type of solutions to the climate crisis that are being put forward. As Antonio was saying, most of the solutions to the climate crisis rely on technological apparatuses, rely on bureaucratic violence, rely on the compartmentalization and the commodification of nature. And really what people are resisting to and opposing to is also this narrative that we should only be focusing on CO2 emissions, on carbon emissions, and if we just focus on the climate, we will solve everything. And so just to conclude, I will conclude, we could be perhaps talking about a case of climate extractivism, of green sacrifice zones, by which we are enclosing the ecological crisis to climate change mitigation, rather than seeing how in the biosphere everything is connected, how human, non-human, more than human assemblages are all what creates the web of life. And here really this type of lithium extraction project would potentially harm the ecological, social, human, economic tissue and assemblages of this region, and even more. So thank you for listening, and
Thank you, Mariana and Antonio, for this inspiring keynote. And for raising some doubts about how capitalism has the ability to tackle climate change and all this technology that we are trying to use for tackling climate change. And I think it's really interesting that the next panel will bring us another logic of development and society.